The night outside was cold, the kind of chill that clung to car windows and crept under coats as people hurried inside for warmth. Neon lights buzzed above the entrance of Benny's American Diner, their red glow flickering faintly against the glass panes. The hum of traffic outside seemed to fade once the heavy door swung shut, replaced by the chaos unique to late-night diners, the clatter of cutlery, sizzling pans from the open kitchen, and conversations layered one over another like mismatched music. Inside, the diner was crowded. Students returning from parties slumped into booths, laughing too loud. Truck drivers with weathered faces sat at the counter, hunched over steaming mugs of black coffee. Families corralled tired children, trying to keep them quiet while waiting for plates of pancakes and fries. The air smelled of grease, butter, burnt toast, and coffee strong enough to keep anyone awake till dawn. In the corner booth, tucked into the shadows where the fluorescent lights didn't quite reach, Emily Carter sat alone. She didn't take up much space. Her leather jacket was draped neatly over her shoulders, and her long legs stretched slightly under the table. A simple ceramic mug of coffee rested in her hands, steam rising slowly as if even time hesitated around her. She wasn't scrolling through her phone or fidgeting with silverware like so many others. Instead, she simply sat, calm, her piercing blue eyes focused on nothing in particular. There was a stillness about her, a gravity that made her presence quietly undeniable. Most people who passed by her booth probably assumed she was another weary traveler, maybe a local who didn't feel like cooking, or someone waiting for company that would never arrive. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. But something about her posture, the way her back stayed straight, the steady rhythm of her breath, suggested discipline. To the untrained eye, she looked like just another diner patron. To anyone who had spent time in combat, though, her stillness would have been unmistakable. The diner, however, wasn't filled with combat veterans. It was filled with ordinary people. And 3 drunk men. They stumbled in like they owned the place. 3 broad-shouldered locals with the swagger of men, who had spent the night trying to impress one another with bad jokes and stronger liquor. Their laughter was harsh, cutting through the softer conversations of the diner. One of them, the tallest, still clutched a half-empty beer bottle he must have smuggled in from wherever they'd been before. The other 2 followed behind, shoving each other playfully, their boots dragging across the linoleum floor. The room shifted subtly as they entered. Waitresses lowered their eyes and moved faster, trying not to draw attention. A mother in the corner tightened her hold on her daughter's hand, steering her focus back toward a melting ice cream sundae. The bullies didn't notice, or didn't care. They were here to entertain themselves, and everyone else was background. It didn't take them long to find a target. Their eyes landed on Emily. Alone. Silent. A woman who hadn't so much as glanced at them. To men like these, her quiet was not strength, it was invitation. They saw someone isolated, defenseless, and in their drunken haze, that seemed like the perfect setup for a laugh. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know what she had seen, what she had endured, or what she was capable of. They just saw what they wanted to see, prey. The tallest one smirked, lifting his beer bottle and slamming it against the table beside her booth with a sharp crack. The sound jolted a nearby couple, forks clattering to plates, but Emily didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't even rise from the swirl of coffee in her mug. "Hey, sweetheart," the man drawled, his voice heavy with alcohol. "That's our table. Why don't you be a doll and move along, huh?" His friend snickered, leaning against the booth, closing in on her space. Emily's fingers tightened ever so slightly around her mug before relaxing again. She set it down carefully on the table, the porcelain making the softest clink. Then, in a voice calm and steady, so calm it almost didn't belong in the noisy diner, she spoke. "You don't want to do this." The words weren't loud. They weren't threatening. But there was weight behind them, enough that a silence briefly cut through the surrounding chatter. A waitress froze mid-step, balancing a tray of burgers and fries. A man at the counter shifted, sensing something about to unfold. The three bullies, however, burst out laughing. The second one, shorter but stockier, leaned down until his face was close to hers, his breath sour with whiskey. "Oh, look at that. She thinks she's tough," he said mockingly, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The third one nudged his friend's shoulder and chuckled. "What's she gonna do, glare us to death?" The diner's energy had shifted. Conversations quieted. Forks were lowered. The tension coiled in the air, fragile and sharp. Somewhere in the back, the jukebox hummed, but even that seemed muted. At her booth, Emily Carter finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she placed both hands on the edge of the table and pushed herself to her feet. She stood tall, her athletic build now visible under the worn leather jacket, her blue eyes finally lifting to meet theirs. The bully smirked, expecting fear. What they found instead was something they couldn't quite name, something in her gaze that made the air around her heavier, sharper. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Not yet. The tallest man grinned when Emily stood. He towered over her by at least a head, his frame broad and heavy from years of bar fights and manual labor. His buddies flanked him, their smug expressions broadcasting that this was all some sort of game. The diner was holding its collective breath. Conversations had stopped. Forks hovered over plates, untouched. A little boy peeked from behind his father's arm, his wide eyes following every movement. The air conditioner hummed, the only steady noise in the room. The tallest bully tapped the lip of his beer bottle against the edge of Emily's table. "You heard me, sweetheart," he said, his voice louder now, forcing the entire diner to hear. "Move. That's our booth." Emily's face didn't change. No frown, no smile, no flicker of hesitation. Her voice came again, soft but threaded with steel. "Last warning. Sit down." It was so calm, so unshaken, that for a split second, the bullies blinked. But alcohol dulls judgment, and arrogance feeds recklessness. The shorter one slapped the table and leaned forward, his face flushed. "Oh ho, she's got a little bite to her," he said, turning to the others. "What do you think, boys? Think she can back it up?" The third bully chuckled, his shoulders shaking. "Not a chance. She's just bluffing. Look at her. Leather jacket and attitude, she's playing tough girl." Laughter spilled from their mouths, cruel and mocking. The sound bounced off the walls of the diner, but not a single person joined in. If anything, the rest of the patrons shrank deeper into their seats, desperate not to be noticed. The mother in the corner booth pulled her daughter close, whispering something hurriedly into her ear. The waitresses stood frozen, trays balanced in trembling hands. The man at the counter reached for his phone, hesitating between calling the police and staying quiet. The bullies didn't notice any of it. They were focused entirely on Emily. The tallest one finally acted. With a quick motion, he reached out, his large hand aiming to clamp around Emily's arm and drag her out of the booth like she was a piece of furniture. He never got the chance. In a blur of motion, Emily's hand shot up. She grabbed his wrist, twisted, and before he could register the pain, she pulled him forward and slammed him face first into the table. The sound cracked through the diner like a gunshot. Plates shattered, glasses tipped, silverware clattered to the floor. The tallest bully groaned, his cheek pressed into the cold surface of the table, his wrist pinned in a grip like iron. Gasps erupted around the room. A couple near the jukebox leapt to their feet. Someone whispered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Emily didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With his face crushed into the table, she spoke quietly, her words deliberate and clear. Sit down. The second bully's jaw dropped, his drunken smirk faltering. What the, he started, but Emily's sharp gaze flicked toward him, and he froze mid-sentence. The third one shook his head, stunned. No way, he muttered. What the hell just happened? Emily released the first bully, letting him stumble back with a groan, his pride wounded more than his body. He held his wrist and glared at her, but his bravado faltered. For a moment, it seemed like that might have been enough, that maybe her swift, precise show of control would have ended it. But pride is a dangerous fuel, and the three men were still burning with it. The second one puffed up his chest, anger overtaking his surprise. You're dead, lady, he growled, stepping forward. Nobody embarrasses us like that. The third moved with him, circling to block her from slipping past. The tension in the diner spiked. Chairs scraped as families tried to gather their things quietly, preparing to leave before the situation spiraled further. A cook peered nervously from the kitchen window, his spatula frozen mid-air. Emily's stance shifted subtly. Her shoulders relaxed, her knees bent slightly, her weight distributed evenly between her feet. It wasn't dramatic, no one in the diner would have recognized it, but it was the posture of someone who had trained to fight, trained to win. She kept her voice steady, low, but her words cut like a blade. This is your last chance. Walk away. The second bully laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Or what? You gonna knock us out with your coffee spoon? The third one sneered, come on, boys. Let's show her what happens when someone mouths off. They lunged together, reckless, thinking numbers and size would overwhelm her. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. But Emily Carter was no ordinary woman. The moment the two men lunged, time seemed to fracture. To the onlookers in the diner, it all happened too fast to fully process. Just a blur of movement, the crash of bodies, and the sound of furniture tipping. But to Emily, it unfolded with sharp clarity, as if her mind had shifted into the cold, efficient rhythm of combat she had lived and breathed for years. The second bully came at her first, his arms wide, aiming to grab her shoulders and force her back against the booth. His approach was sloppy, his balance off, fueled by rage rather than control. Emily pivoted smoothly, her body turning sideways. With one precise motion, she dropped her weight low, swept her leg out, and took his feet out from under him. His body hit the floor with a dull thud, the air bursting out of his lungs in a shocked grunt. Chairs rattled, the table beside him shaking violently as plates toppled. Before the crowd could even react, the third bully was on her. He threw a wild punch toward her head, his knuckles glinting in the fluorescent light. Emily's reflexes kicked in. She shifted her head just an inch to the side, letting the fist cut through empty air. Then, with fluid speed, she drove her elbow into his ribs. The sound was sickening, a sharp crack followed by his pained groan as he doubled over, clutching his side. The tallest bully, the one whose wrist she had twisted earlier, snarled and shoved himself off the table, fury etched into every line of his face. He roared, charging at her like a bull, determined to flatten her with sheer force. Emily didn't flinch. As he barreled forward, she sidestepped at the last moment, her hand shooting out to grab the front of his shirt. Using his momentum against him, she spun and slammed him against the nearest wall. The impact rattled the framed photos hanging there, sending one crashing to the floor. The entire diner erupted into chaos. Plates shattered on the tile. A waitress screamed. Someone yelled, "Call the cops," while another whispered in awe, "She's trained, she fights like she's military." Emily kept her grip on the tallest man's shirt, her forearm pressed against his chest to hold him in place. His face was inches from hers, his breath ragged, his bravado slipping with every second he met her icy blue stare. "I told you," she said, her voice low and calm, cutting through the noise. "Walk away." But his pride wouldn't allow it. He shoved at her arm, snarling, "Not a chance." "I'll." He didn't finish. Emily's knee drove sharply into his midsection, folding him forward. She released him, letting him collapse to the floor with a groan. The second bully scrambled back to his feet, red-faced and furious. "You're gonna pay for that," he barked, rushing at her again. But his movements were sluggish now, clumsy, his balance still shaken from the fall. Emily pivoted smoothly, grabbed his arm, and redirected his weight. In one fluid motion, she flipped him over her shoulder. He landed flat on his back, the air knocked out of him in a brutal wheeze. The crowd gasped again, several people rising from their seats to get a better look. Phones appeared in hands, some recording, others already dialing emergency numbers. The third bully, still clutching his ribs, tried one last desperate move. With a growl, he lunged, aiming to tackle her around the waist. Emily sidestepped effortlessly, hooked her foot around his ankle, and sent him sprawling face-first onto the floor. Chairs toppled. Food scattered across the tiles. The sound of groans and curses filled the diner, but Emily stood in the middle of the wreckage like a pillar of calm, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. For 15 seconds, the world had turned upside down. The three bullies, once towering with drunken arrogance, now lay groaning on the ground, bruised, humiliated, and utterly defeated. The diner fell into stunned silence, broken only by the hiss of the coffee machine in the corner. Then came the whispers. "She's military." No, she's too precise. She fights like a professional." "Did you see that?" She barely moved, and they're all down. Every pair of eyes was locked on Emily. To the little girl in the corner booth, she looked like a superhero, who had just stepped out of a comic book. To the mother beside her, she was a shield, a reminder that strength didn't always come from size or noise. To the truck driver at the counter, she was the kind of fighter he had only ever seen in war films. The bullies staggered, trying to push themselves back up, their faces flushed with humiliation. The tallest one held his side, wincing with each breath. His glare burned with hatred as he spat out his threat between clenched teeth. "You're dead, lady," he growled, stumbling toward her again. Emily didn't move at first. She let him come closer, her posture loose, deceptively relaxed. Then, just as he reached for her, she shifted, quick as lightning. She grabbed his shirt, spun him around, and slammed him against the wall once more, this time harder. Her forearm pressed across his chest, pinning him like an insect. The room held its breath. Her voice, when it came, was calm, deadly serious and louder now, so that everyone could hear. "I served 2 tours overseas. I've faced men twice your size, with real weapons in their hands. Do you really think a diner brawl is going to scare me?" The bully's bravado cracked. His eyes widened, his face draining of color, as the reality sank in. His friends froze where they stood, suddenly unsure, their drunken confidence shattered by the weight of her words. Around them, the diner remained silent, awed, terrified, and utterly captivated. The bully pinned against the wall writhed under Emily's hold, but he could no longer meet her gaze. His bravado had drained away, leaving only fear masked behind a weak scowl. His friends, one still hunched over with bruised ribs and the other sprawled on the floor catching his breath, exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time since stepping into the diner, the 3 men looked small. The silence that stretched through the room was heavy, almost sacred. Everyone knew something extraordinary had just happened. The mother in the corner whispered to her daughter, "Don't be afraid, sweetheart. Look, she's protecting us." The girl's wide eyes never left Emily. At the counter, the truck driver set down his mug of coffee with a deliberate clink and muttered, half in awe, half in disbelief, "Damn. She's the real deal." Emily held the bully there for one more second, then released him. He staggered back, collapsing into a chair, his chest heaving. His friends hovered close, but didn't move toward her again. "Sit," Emily ordered, her voice sharp as a blade. And they did. The three men, who had entered so loudly, now sat bruised and defeated, avoiding her gaze like scolded children. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. It started hesitantly, with a single pair of hands clapping from the corner. Then another joined in. Within seconds, the sound swelled, filling the diner with energy. Patrons rose from their seats, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. Relief and admiration rippled through them. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, her voice carrying just far enough for others nearby to hear. "Mommy, she's a superhero." Emily didn't smile. She simply adjusted her leather jacket and exhaled slowly, as if resetting herself back into calm after the storm. Just then, red and blue lights cut through the windows, flashing against the chrome trim of the diner. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, until two police cars screeched to a halt outside. The door burst open, and two uniformed officers stepped in, hands near their holsters, scanning the room. Someone had called them during the fight, maybe a frightened waitress, maybe one of the families who'd hurried out when things escalated. The bullies straightened suddenly, smirks crawling back onto their faces as if salvation had arrived. The tallest one, rubbing his wrist, sneered through a wince. "You're screwed now, lady," he muttered under his breath. But Emily didn't even glance his way. She remained standing in the center of the diner, her posture composed, her face unreadable. The officer's eyes scanned the scene, the overturned chairs, the shattered plates, the three men bruised and battered, and finally landed on Emily. Their expressions shifted instantly. "Lieutenant Carter," the taller officer said, his voice cutting through the air with stunned respect. "We didn't know you were back in town." The diner collectively froze. The bullies blinked in confusion. One of them stammered, "Wait, what? Did he just say?" "Lieutenant." The tallest one's smirk faltered, replaced with disbelief. "No way," he whispered, shaking his head. She's really military." Emily finally spoke, her voice calm, almost formal. "They attacked me. I defended myself. End of story." The officers exchanged glances, then nodded. No more explanation was needed. The taller officer turned to the three men, his expression hardening. "You three, on your feet. Now." "What?" one of them barked, his drunken arrogance sputtering back. "She's the one who—" "Enough," the officer snapped. "You started a fight in a public diner. That's assault. You're coming with us." The bullies sputtered in protest, but their voices held no conviction. The officers moved quickly, cuffing them one by one. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the room, punctuating their humiliation. Patrons who had once shrunk away from the men now watched openly, their faces lit with satisfaction. As the men were dragged toward the door, the little girl in the corner called out again, her voice high and clear. "She's not just a superhero, Mommy. She's real." Emily lowered herself back into her booth with quiet grace. She picked up her coffee, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip as if nothing had happened. Around her, the diner buzzed with renewed energy, whispers, applause, the lingering adrenaline of what they had witnessed. The manager, a middle-aged man with sweat on his brow and relief in his eyes, stepped forward. His voice trembled as he spoke. Your meal is on the house tonight." "Thank you." Emily gave him a small nod, no more, no less. Gratitude without ceremony. She wasn't there for recognition. She wasn't there for praise. Outside, the police car doors slammed, and the three bullies were driven away, their faces pale in the flashing lights. Inside, All eyes remained on Emily Carter. Some whispered. Some stared. Some simply sat in silence, processing the reminder that true strength doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to posture. It acts. And it had taken only 15 seconds. The camera of imagination zoomed in on her face, calm as ever, her blue eyes steady as she raised the mug of coffee to her lips once more. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The memory of what had happened would linger in that diner for years to come. The diner's energy shifted once the police cars pulled away, their flashing lights fading into the distance. The chaos of shattered plates, overturned chairs, and scattered food remained, but the tension, the fear that had filled every corner, was gone. What lingered now was something else entirely. Respect. Emily Carter sat quietly in her booth, as though nothing had happened. Her coffee had cooled during the storm, but she lifted the mug anyway, savoring a small sip as though she had earned it. To her, this was nothing unusual. She had been in far worse situations, against enemies who didn't just threaten her pride but her life. Compared to those battles overseas, this was nothing more than a ripple in a pond. But to the people in the diner, it was unforgettable. A few brave souls approached her table hesitantly. The truck driver, who had watched from the counter, shuffled forward first, his baseball cap in his hands. He said, his voice gruff but sincere, that was, well, I've never seen anything like it. You saved folks a lot of trouble tonight. Emily looked up, her piercing blue eyes steady. She gave him a small nod, but said nothing more. Next came the mother and her daughter. The little girl peeked out shyly from behind her mother's leg, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her small voice wavered, but carried through the hush of the room. Are you really a superhero? The question drew a ripple of soft laughter from nearby patrons, but Emily didn't smile. She leaned forward slightly, her expression warm but firm. No, she said gently. I'm just someone who knows how to stand up when it matters. The girl tilted her head, thinking hard about the answer, then whispered, that sounds like a superhero to me. Her mother's eyes watered as she pulled her daughter close, mouthing a quiet, thank you before retreating to their booth. The waitresses began cleaning the mess, their movements faster now, but no longer frantic with fear. They stole glances at Emily between trips, whispering to each other in hushed awe. One of them, a young woman barely out of high school, finally gathered the courage to speak. She said, voice trembling, you didn't even look scared. Not once. Emily paused, setting down her mug. She considered the question carefully, then replied, fear is normal. But fear doesn't have to control you. You control it. The waitress swallowed hard, nodded quickly, and hurried back to her work, her face lit with newfound admiration. Slowly, the diner settled back into its rhythm. The clatter of dishes returned. Conversations resumed, though quieter than before, as if everyone felt the need to speak with more respect for the walls that had just borne witness to something extraordinary. The jukebox clicked back to life, crooning an old song that filled the air with a soft hum. But no one in that diner would ever forget what they had seen. In the corner, Emily finished the last sip of her coffee, set the mug down, and slipped a few bills onto the table despite the manager's earlier insistence that her meal was free. She didn't do what she did for handouts. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because strength, real strength, wasn't about showing off. It was about standing tall when others couldn't. As she rose from the booth, the room instinctively quieted. People watched her cross the diner with the same reverence reserved for soldiers, heroes, or legends. But Emily Carter wasn't trying to be any of those things. She was simply herself, a woman who had been trained, tested, and hardened by battles far greater than a diner scuffle. The bell above the door jingled softly as she pushed it open. The cool night air greeted her, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and asphalt. She paused for a moment on the steps, breathing it in. Behind her, the diner slowly resumed its life, but she knew the memory of this night would stay with them all. She walked down the street, her leather jacket swaying with each step, her figure fading into the glow of the streetlights. Inside, whispers lingered. Did you see her move? She didn't even break a sweat. They said she was Navy, a SEAL, I think. No, she's something else. Did you see how calm she was? The little girl's voice rose above them all, innocent and unshaken. Next time you think someone looks weak, remember her. And with that, the story of Emily Carter began to take root. It would travel beyond that diner, carried in retellings by truckers on the road, waitresses to their families, children to their schools. The tale of the woman who needed only 15 seconds to show that strength doesn't have to roar, it only has to act. For Emily, it was just another night. Another cup of coffee finished before the road called her onward. For everyone else, it was the night they learned that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes, they wear leather jackets, drink black coffee, and remind the world that appearances can deceive. And that true strength, quiet, disciplined, unwavering, never loses fights.